Greetings to the maybe 3 people who found their way to this incredibly niche video. Maybe you saw a flash of a cartoon you remembered and thought was just a fever dream. Maybe you really love horse content. Or perhaps you just clicked on it by accident. Why not stay a while and hear of an Australian classic that is quite close to my heart? Buckle in, this is going to be a long one. It will probably be the longest video I ever make. Even now, many decades after I first read The Silver Brumby, I find myself listening to the first 4 books on Audible. The Silver Brumby is an Australian classic written by Elaine Mitchell all the way back in 1958. It was then adapted into film in 1993 and into a cartoon series in 1998. This video today will compare all 3. First, starting with a breakdown of the books and the plot and what makes them a classic, before moving on to the adaptations and whether or not they hit their mark. This is your warning that I will be talking about the plot for all 3 versions, with many spoilers for the later books. Unfortunately, I can't really do a detailed breakdown and comparison without talking about the plot. So let's get into it. Elaine Mitchell grew up on a cattle farm and has a deep love for the Australian bush. She became a well-known horsewoman, skier and environmentalist. She passed away in 2002 at the age of 88. Mitchell's work focused on the snowy mountains, including the main range, the Cascades, and other areas which she popularised in her Silver Brumby series. Mitchell's son, John, donated her typewriter to the National Museum of Australia, where it can still be viewed today. Initially turned away by 6 publishers, The Silver Brumby became an instant bestseller on publication in 1958 and has never been out of print since. There are additional 8 books which are generally not seen as part of the main Silver Brumby series, but several of them feature characters or locations from the Silver Brumby series and could be considered to exist in the same fictional universe. I personally did not enjoy these very much because I wasn't interested in these new characters that had so little to do with the main protagonist that I'd grown up with. For the sake of this video essay, we will be focusing on the first book with some mentions of the 2nd, 3rd and 4th. The plot of the first book is as follows. A creamy mare by the name of Bell Bell has her foal one stormy night. The foal is a colt just as silver and creamy as herself. She names him Thaura, which means wind. She worries for him as she knows he will be hunted by man and attacked by other stallions for his strange colour. Once he's old enough, she takes him back to the herd where they run into Miri, Bell Bell's old friend, and her own foal, Storm. Thaura and Storm grow up together and remain friends all their lives. When they are around 3 years old, a grey stallion named the Brolga challenges their father and the king of the Cascade Brumbies, Yarraman. Yarraman is killed and Thaura and Storm must leave. Arrow is another half-brother of theirs. Unfortunately, he comes too. He's always been bigger and stronger and is jealous of Thaura for his unusual appearance. As soon as Thaura captures his first fillies, Arrow tries to take them. One of these fillies is the daughter of the Brolga, the faithful Boon Boon, a light grey mare and a reoccurring character for many of the books to come. Eventually, Thaura defeats Arrow by tricking him off a cliff and accidentally killing him. As he gets older, Thaura becomes more curious of mankind and follows the men one day to find a beautiful tame cream filly named Golden. He is determined to capture her for his own herd and visits her many times, even daring to jump into the yard in an attempt to lead her out over the rails. As a result, he's nearly captured but manages to escape the men. Finally, during a heavy snowstorm, Thaura is able to lead Golden away by jumping out of the paddock. He and Boon Boon teach Golden how to be a wild Brumby, but as she becomes heavy with foal, she becomes nervous and fearful. Golden returns to the man on her own and gives birth to her daughter, Kunama. Thaura does eventually free her again and leads her and his daughter to a place he has found for them called the Secret Valley. The Secret Valley is a rather important place that is mentioned for many more books, is hidden away and can't be seen from horseback. Thaura basically finds this place by accident on one of his many wanderings and learns of a place where he can jump safely down into it from above. It looks like he's jumping into a deep canyon, but he's actually jumping onto a ledge. This is important for later. Thaura grows into a mature stallion and finally fights toe-to-toe with the Brolga, defeating him and becoming the new king of the Cascade Brumbies. Soon, there is a huge Brumby drive as the men hunt for more wild Brumbies. There is an Aboriginal tracker with them who is sent in search of a mare named Lubra, an escaped racehorse of great value. The men ask the tracker for help in trying to catch the Silver Brumby. Thaura hides Boon Boon, Kunama and Golden away, but unfortunately is caught up in the huge Brumby drive. The man on the black horse and the tracker then chase Thaura until he comes to the entrance of the secret valley and leaps down to safety. From the men's perspective, it looks like he jumps to his death. They are saddened for having caused this and leave the mountains. Lubra is recaptured by the tracker and taken back to the lower country, though her colt manages to escape with Storm. This is the longest part of the plot breakdown, but it is important as the main focus is on the first book. It covers just a fraction of the full story, however. I would encourage you to read it or listen to it for yourself. Of the first 4 books, I would say this is probably my second favourite in the whole series. The second book, titled The Silver Brumby's Daughter, is about Kunama. She grows up with her father in the Secret Valley. During that time, Golden has another foal, another creamy that she names Lightning. Kunama starts to find the valley too small for her. Her father takes her out to meet the other herds, and Kunama decides that she must find a stallion who is just as strange and unique as herself. That stallion turns out to be Tambo, Lubra's son. He was raised by Storm and is brave enough to track Kunama down, risking the king's anger. However, Thaura accepts him and Kunama is allowed to leave, but is warned to return before the men see her. Inevitably, she stays out too late, and though she escapes the men once, she is captured by a man and his son. The rest of the book is her journey with them, her escape and her eventual return to the high country. I did not enjoy this book as much as I did the other 3, primarily because the ending feels a little unfair. She doesn't really escape as such. The boy just ends up feeling so sorry for her that he just lets her go. It's a little bit anticlimactic. The third book in the series is definitely my favourite. Titled Silver Brumbies of the South, it follows the character of Baringa, Kunama's silver son, and his travels to the south with Thaura, Storm, his uncle Lightning, and the main herd. In the south, we meet a host of new characters like the emus. Lightning fights and claims his first filly, Gunda. Baringa also meets Dawn, an incredibly beautiful snow-white filly. The third and fourth book focus on Baringa as he grows up with Dawn and learns to become the king of the south. The first 4 books are generally considered the main storyline of Thaura and his herd. In the 5th book, an elderly Thaura heads away from his beloved high country after Golden and Boon Boon have died of old age. And the 6th book is heavily suggested that Thaura is also dead of old age, and the story instead focuses on his last-born son, Wiramira, returning to his father's lands. I personally really dislike these last 2 books. I found them incredibly depressing, and I've never gone back to reread them after that first time, but who knows, maybe you will very much enjoy them. Trust me, these are the cliff notes. The stories have much more depth, full of cunning chases and traps, escaping manhunts and escaping mad stallions, but I have to leave something for you to experience for yourself. Now, let's break down into a little further detail. Whether or not Thaura is actually a white and silver horse or a palomino does cause some small debate in the community to this day. In much of the first book, he's described as a creamy, especially by the men that hunt him. His mother Bell Bell is also described as a creamy, which leads some to believe that he's in fact a palomino. They also went with the palomino for the live-action adaptation, but we'll get into more detail about that later. In certain passages of the books, he's described as silver, including by Golden herself, who says that the men who hunt him have given him the name Silver. To add to even more confusion, several articles I read for this essay just blatantly say that he's a white horse. In later books, they tend to drop the descriptive of creamy altogether, and both him and his herd are described as silver horses. There is also the fact that the title of the books is The Silver Brumby and not The Creamy Brumby, The Golden Brumby, or The Palomino Brumby. Thaura and his family have always been described as able to disappear in snow by becoming completely invisible, which personally I highly doubt a Palomino could do. I have never thought of Thaura or his herd as Palominos, but I can understand why some people wouldn't agree. What I think makes these books particularly unique is how little there is to reveal the true age of the series. The books take place in the state of Victoria, across the snowy mountains and in parts of Kosciuszko National Park, a wildlife reserve that still exists to this day. Places mentioned in the books, such as Lake Kudapatamba, is a real place that you can visit. As the books are from the perspective of the horses, cars and trucks aren't described as anything other than noisy metal machines. This unique style means that the books could be taking place a couple of years ago or 100 years ago. For the most part, there are only a few things that date the books, especially the first one. Cattle driving is mentioned quite a bit in the first books. Men bring their cattle out and leave them to graze over the summer month. Whilst free-roaming cattle driving does still take place in Australia, it no longer takes place anywhere that could be considered a national park. Another minor detail is the very brief mention of humans using wooden boards that they call skis. Wooden skis are of course still used, but are certainly less common these days. The last point is a little more serious, but probably went unnoticed by non-Australian readers, and that is the use of the word Aborigine in the first book. The term Aborigines has long been considered inappropriate and outdated. In some places in Australia, it's just straight up offensive. This is because it has racist connotations with Australia's colonial past, where the native population of Australia was identified as flora rather than as human beings. Now, correct terminology is very complicated and the term is still used in some places, but the general advice is to use Aboriginal person, Aboriginal, or Torres Strait Islander. None of these points were enough to dampen my love for the books, however, and they hold up to the test of time incredibly well. From the storytelling to the wide range of characters and description of true Australian bushland, it's easy to see why these books became popular classics. My partner always thought it was funny that most of the horses have these beautiful Aboriginal names. There's Thaura, Kunama, Wiramira, Baringa, Jillamatong. And then there's the kangaroo, the only actual native animal character. Nah, his name's Benny. No native name for you, bitch. The emus, who feature in the third and fourth books, don't even get names. They're just called the emus. Bit rude, but anyway. Let's start with the cartoon series. This cartoon series was an incredible find to me. I went through a massive obsession with horses as a kid and spent many of my formative years pretending to either be one or pretending to own one, and loving all television that involved horses. That included The Saddle Club, Spirit, and of course Horseland. I also loved to draw animals, and I had a weird obsession with atomically correct proportions. The better the animation was, the more I loved the show. Sorry, creepy Horseland dog, you failed that test. Your weird face and non-moving paws always gave me the ick. Why does he stare into my soul? Anywho, The Silver Brumby became an animated children's television series written by John Steffens, Judy Malgrim, and Paul Williams. It first aired in 1996 and spanned 2 seasons, totaling 39 episodes. As a standalone cartoon, it's pretty decent for its time. The messaging is sound enough to follow a sort of Captain Planet vibe. Take care of nature, respect your elders, don't leave fires unattended, don't litter, and poaching is bad, etc., etc. It's likely just the time period in which it was made, but the show didn't stray away from some of those nastier elements that can be overlooked or sugar-coated in modern children's cartoons. Bushfires happen and they're terrifying. Animals die in bushfires. People kill animals for money. Drought can be devastating for local wildlife. I honestly love the blunt honesty in some of these scenes.
Hunting us? But who'd want to hunt us?
Well, firstly, you can be bitten by a poisonous spider or a snake, but if you leave them alone, they should leave you alone.
What else?
The eagle is a great danger. There's nothing an eagle likes more than a nice, juicy dingo pup for his dinner.
And what else?
Man is a danger. We can outrun him, but we can't outrun a bullet from his gun.
First off, let's start with the title song. This song slaps.
The darkness of the night, in the fury of the storm, with the silver mark of freedom, his spirit was born. Thara, they named him Thara, like the wind that is free. Thara, they named him Thara, to be king of the bush, his destiny.
I sang along to it every time it came on the television, much to the annoyance of my long-suffering parents. The backgrounds of the show have a beautiful watercolour hand-painted feel, and much of the scenery is done in a similar style. There is a fair bit of repeated use of short animations, which again is not very uncommon. Animation is time-consuming and very expensive, especially for a small team, and there was certainly no AI to assist back in the early 90s. For something like a kids' show, it's not at all unusual for certain scenes to be reused. There were many new characters added to fill out the roster for an interesting children's show. Some characters that played a very small part in the books got a much bigger role in the cartoons. The emus were given the Tweedledee and Tweedledum treatment, which is fairly ironic comparison because...
Fine day for a stroll, Mew.
Oh, most absolutely and categorically, eh? Very fine indeed.
Oh!
Oh!
Yeah, they got significantly dumbed down and made way more insufferable. In the books, the emus were these mysterious, slightly arrogant, vain creatures that liked to think of themselves as wise. They're quite minor characters and didn't come into the series until books 3 and 4. Though frustrating, they were usually helpful and they certainly didn't talk in these weird, twittering rhymes. And then there's Arrow. Poor Arrow.
It's that stupid Arrow. How can Thawra have disappeared? Where's that blasted Currawong when I need him? Never mind. If I can't find Thawra, I'll teach Arrow a lesson instead. Thawra can wait till another day.
Bronca, stop! You've got the wrong horse! I'm after Thawra too!
You're weak, Arrow, leading two friends to their capture. Stop cringing. Stand and fight like a stallion. Tell your leader, Thawra.
He's not my leader!
How dare you answer me back? I'm the king of all the Cascade Brumbies. Tell your leader his day will come. Now begone before I lose my patience. You're pathetic, Arrow. A disgrace to the Brumbies. Look at you. Get out of my sight. And think yourself lucky to have survived an encounter with the most powerful horse in the high country.
They really butchered this character, both in design and in temperament. The word butchered is probably also slightly ironic because in the book that bitch is dead. Oh yes, as previously mentioned, Arrogant Arrow dies barely a third of the way into the first book. They kept him in the cartoon to kind of fill that unintelligent bully character trope. Arrow's greatest characteristic and cause of his arrogance was due to the fact that he looked just like his father, the great and noble Yarraman. Arrow and Thawra are half-brothers as mentioned, and in the book, Arrow is described as a powerful chestnut stallion with a golden mane and tail. This version of Arrow... well, he's a ginger with a ball cut and an arrow painted on his forehead. That's why they call him Arrow, ain't it? Aside from that, he's fine. He's just there to round out the cast of characters and be the reason for certain catastrophes. Again, I have to remind myself that this is a kids' show. There's a criteria that has to be met and this idiot ticks a box. The man on the black horse makes a return and actually plays quite a large role in the series as one of the few recurring human characters. In the books, neither he nor his horse are given a name. I will admit, I really like the name Echo for the black horse. Several human characters have been added, such as the old prospector, Charlie and his father Don, and a couple of other reoccurring poachers. I couldn't quite tell if Charlie and his father are supposed to be the boy and the father who captured Kunama in the second book. I think they just drew inspiration from these characters without directly saying it. The Brolga's character actually got a glow-up in the cartoon. He's portrayed as a rough, vicious, arrogant individual who talks like...
Ridiculous. I saw it myself. The man had the rope firmly round that young whippersnapper's neck.
Oh well, he talks like a grumpy boomer, but again, given the time period, that's probably fair. There was one thing in particular they added to the Brolga's character that I actually really liked. Though at first he appears very two-dimensional, we actually learn that he is a decent herd leader. He cares deeply for his herd, and when he finds out that his daughter or mate Aranda is in danger, he does everything he can to protect them. In the book, the Brolga doesn't really care in the slightest when his daughter Boon Boon leaves the herd. It's just the way of the bush for a filly to leave and join the herd of another stallion. Elaine Mitchell doesn't describe the Brolga as an evil tyrant. He just happens to be the most powerful stallion at the time. In fact, the first time we're ever introduced to him, she describes him like this.
"That's the Brolga," they muttered, and blew through their nostrils with excitement. "And he's got quite a big herd." "Who's the Brolga?" the foals both asked. "He's a young grey stallion, a fine horse, very strong. Someday he may be the leading stallion, for he will beat Yarraman when he attains his full strength."
In the cartoon, the Brolga is openly protective of Boon Boon and seems to genuinely care for her feelings and safety.
Sire! Sire! Boon Boon's in trouble! Men are after her, and Thara's herd!
What? Lead the way, Karawang!
I thought this was kind of a nice touch, and it stops the Brolga from just being another generic bad guy who does all of the generic bad guy things. Of all the original cast of characters, probably the most unchanged was Benny the Kangaroo, Boon Boon, and Storm. Boon Boon was described as a light grey mare who was wise and peaceable. Storm is noble, kind, and strong, and apt to tease Thara and disapprove of his more harebrained schemes. Both horses are much the same in the cartoon as they are in the books. Golden, on the other hand, is another character that got treated pretty roughly by the cartoon. In the books, she is a tame horse. It's mentioned that her instincts aren't as sharp, and as such, she's understandably skittish and not so skilled at hiding herself. Boon Boon befriends her and teaches her the way of the wild horses alongside Thara. In the cartoon, Golden is 100% the maiden in distress. She's noisy, whiny, always in trouble and needs rescuing, and she just all round sounds very doughy. Again, I'm fairly sure this was done just to fill a niche, but I really don't think this was necessary. As a kid, I can remember watching an episode, seeing Golden and thinking, oh god, not her again. But it does go one step further. Massive spoilers for anyone who doesn't want to hear the ending of the cartoon in particular. This is your chance to click ahead. The cartoon has a completely different ending to the books. Not just an arguably ambiguous ending like the live-action film, but an ending that changes the outcome of the storyline forever. To recap, in the first book, Golden does indeed go back to the man, but after she had her foal, Kunama, Thara comes for them during a storm and leads them out over a downed paddock fence. After this, Golden and Kunama stay with Thara in the high country. In the cartoon, Golden goes back to the man because of an injury rather than because she's heavy and foal, and though she does escape to see Thara again, she doesn't stay. She doesn't join Thara's herd or have his foal. In other words, Kunama is never born, which means Lightning and Baringa are never born. So the events of the following books can never happen. I'm honestly not sure why they did this. I was so sure that I'd misremembered that I actually went back and rewatched the last half of the final season, and...
So the creatures of the high country experienced another brush with fire. And through this they learned that Karawang wasn't all bad. Golden returned to the man. But soon another welcome stranger would join their numbers.
This is the last time we ever see Golden. She's not in any later episodes. She just goes back to the man. The end. The last episode of the cartoon, The Final Encounter, is a slightly mangled amalgamation of the first book's ending. There's a very Lion King-esque moment where Thaura talks to Yaraman for guidance, which is strictly a cartoon-only scene. And the way in which Thaura wins his fight against the Brolga is actually the exact opposite to how he wins in the book. In the book, any scuffles between the two stallions is treated very carefully by Thaura. He knows that he's younger and not as strong, so he uses all of his tricks and his fantastic speed to stop the Brolga from killing him if they should ever encounter one another. It's only once Thaura has reached his full mature strength that he finally fights the other stallion toe to toe. At the end of the story, he draws the Brolga out and fights him in front of both herds, defeating him but leaving him living. Of course, having two stallions beating the crap out of each other is probably not particularly kid-friendly, so in the cartoon, Thaura uses his speed to tire the Brolga out, forcing the older horse to chase him. He tricks him into running into a wall and finally just dodges out of the way so the Brolga accidentally tumbles off a cliff. Yeah, to be honest, it feels a bit cheap. Thaura just declares himself king of the Cascade Brumbies and banishes the Brolga. All the animals cheer and the show ends. My final thoughts on the show are as follows. The music is memorable, the animation is beautiful, and the animals are well drawn. Unfortunately, as an adaptation, it has some pretty harsh failings. Few of the characters remain unchanged, with some very baffling decisions made by the writing team. There are several episodes where the humans and the horses all make friends and get along, which is a complete failing within the context of the books, where the horses avidly avoid and are terrified by all humans. I do also have a theory about Golden that could be completely false, and it ties back to a controversy surrounding the books. Oh yes, there is indeed a controversy. For those who aren't aware or just haven't given it much thought on the topic, horses are not native to Australia. They are actually considered a very damaging and invasive feral pest. They were introduced in 1788 with the first settlers, who brought over thoroughbreds and a mix of Spanish breeds. There are, of course, no large predators to hunt the horses. We may have many spiders and snakes and fish and plants and just about everything else in Australia, but thankfully no large carnivores. Ish. So populations of these feral horses have just exploded. There are currently over 400,000 wild horses across Australia, which is the largest wild population in the world, something that actually stunned me when I read this fact. These populations have caused enormous amounts of damage. The horses often trample or overgraze near streams and water catchments, increasing the runoff and reducing water quality. They also compete with local species for food, pushing out native animals. There are many associations set up to protect the Brumbies or capture and train them, but the misinformation on the topic is rampant, and many are in denial about just how much damage these large animals are doing to the native ecosystem. This is not to mention how much the wild herds can suffer during extreme environments, such as the droughts or floods, that they just aren't built to handle. Sadly, there just isn't enough people who can take on these animals, and the government and the local population often butt heads as to what is to be done about the problem.
Alan Lanyon has been defending the plight of the Brumby for decades.
It very much is a war, but sadly, at the end of the day, Kosciuszko National Park suffers because we can't get broad consensus on any particular issue.
There seems to be agreement among people who live in the high country that Brumby numbers in Kosciuszko National Park are too high. What they don't agree on, though, is what to do about them.
They needed to be culled. The numbers, as far as what I can see, are out of hand.
Trapping and rehoming, definitely.
Parks Victoria is currently facing legal action over its plans to cull 600 wild horses. There are now calls for a national Brumby management plan.
It's definitely time for the federal government to step in and follow the science, do what's right for this country.
But what's considered right depends on who you ask. Rosie King, ABC News, Kyandra.
The Silver Brumby series is a beloved classic for many, and there are those who believe that the books romanticised Brumbies and caused people to sympathise with them. This, though probably unlikely, might be the reason why they ultimately decided not to have Golden stay in the high country. I don't think they wanted the message to be that a free horse in the Australian bush is a job well done. Still, the removal of Golden completely destroys the future timeline, so regardless of its reasoning, that's still a fail. If I had the ability to recreate these books as an animated series, I probably would have done the first 4 books, with each book getting its own season. Sort of Animals of Farthing Wood style. That way, the audience could get the same sense of growth with the characters. There are certainly plenty of characters to work with across the books, but alas, this will likely remain a pipe dream. The live-action adaptation was released in 1993. The film opened on 22 screens in Australia and grossed around $153,000 in its opening week, placing 9th in the Australian box office. It was filmed in the Victorian Highlands. It does not have the best reviews, but with an average rating of around 5.8 out of 10 stars on IMDb. Produced by Colin South and starring Russell Crowe and Coraline Goodall, the plot of the film follows the first book with relative accuracy. It's told from the perspective of the author, Elaine Mitchell, reading her transcript to her daughter, Indy Mitchell. The live-action adaptation does have its own set of problems. Far from adding characters, the film really cuts down. As with many book-to-film adaptations, it had to do a lot of work with only a certain runtime, so much of the story is slimmed down. Boon Boon is left out completely, as is Brother Storm and Arrow and the ever-faithful Benny. Instead, we focus primarily on Thowra, his mother Bell Bell, and the men who rounded up the Brumbies, Golden and of course the Brolga. As an adaptation that has cut content, it does relatively well to stick to the basic storyline. Thowra is born, learns the ways of the world from his dam, finds himself the obsession of any man who sees him, grows up in the high country, sees his father get killed by the Brolga, meets Golden, leads her to freedom. Golden becomes pregnant, returns to the man until her foal is born. Thowra leads his mate and his daughter to freedom. He fights the Brolga and wins, becoming the new king. The men chase him, he leaps from the cliff, leading the men to believe he's dead. The end. One small note of change is to be made with Golden's first escape. In the book, the yard she's placed in has rails that are far too high for her to jump. Thowra has to wait for the man to move her to the paddock to protect her from a snowstorm. Only then was the fence low enough for her to jump out. In the film, she just jumps out of the yard first go. Honestly, if that's the case, I'm amazed they don't lose more horses. There are several major issues that contributed to the movie's poor score. Whilst the plot sounds simple, I assure you it gets more complicated. The first and foremost being that the horse used for Thowra was a rather orange-looking palomino with a black muzzle. There's also the problem that, it's not a stallion. In fact, the horse isn't even a gelding. Yes, it's a mare. The horse they chose to use for Thowra's rearing and challenging scenes is a mare. This did not go unnoticed by fans of the books. Another massive blow for fans was the realization that none of the horses used in the film were in fact Brumbies. I'm personally not sure how I feel on this topic. I certainly didn't expect the filmmakers to go out and film wild horses for all the scenes. Some of the scenes are reasonably complex, and it makes sense that they would need to use horses that were trained for the film industry. In saying that, I do understand the complaint, as many Brumbies don't have the same body type as these rather lovely, well-groomed looking animals. A rather bizarre nitpick I read were people complaining that the horse used for the Brolga was too pretty. Fun fact, the Brolga was actually played by 3 different horses over the course of filming. Don't get me wrong, they are very nice looking horses, but again, the book describes the Brolga as a strong, powerful grey stallion. She never really describes him as ugly, so I'm not quite sure where that criticism comes from. People also didn't appreciate the lack of depth in the characters and the focus on the human characters, considering that they were not the protagonists or even the main antagonists in the book. When you cut content in your live-action adaptation, you need to be careful about what you add. An example of this being done well would be the movie Coraline. The character of Wybie was actually an in-movie only character, but there was a very good reason for his addition.
Wybie wasn't in the book. He was written in the screenplay as a story device for Coraline, and we all worked really hard to make sure that in the end, he was a worthwhile partner for Coraline.
For the Silver Brumby movie, there was no real reason as to why the focus needed to be so heavily on the human characters, other than perhaps they thought it would make the film more understandable. If this is true, then I personally don't agree. There are plenty of animal-told stories, such as Babe and Milo and Otis, that did very well at the time. A plot can be told from the perspective of an animal without it becoming unintelligible. In fact, if this movie was aimed at kids, I would argue that this style would have suited it better. One rather harsh one-star review stated, "The soundtrack was the worst I've ever heard. It would have been more appropriate for Mortal Kombat. The close-up of the horses waving its forelegs in slow motion with the bad music was reminiscent of a scene straight out of Godzilla. It was only rivaled by its stupidity by the close-up of Russell Crowe's mouth during his maniacal laughter scenes. I can't believe we sat through the whole thing." Ouch. Ridiculously, despite all this, those weren't the issues that I had with this film. Oh no. My problem, like the cartoon, was with the ending. Thara jumped off the cliff just like in the books, but here's the problem. They very clearly show the cliff. There is no secret valley. There is no quest to find the secret valley, and there's no scene showing Thara learning how to get down safely. He's not jumping into a foggy place between two canyons. It's very clearly a sheer wall of rock into open space. Sure, they don't show a body hitting the ground, but there is very clearly nowhere where he could have landed. Yeah, they straight up murdered that bitch. Even the author herself at the end of the movie was like, "Oh well, some say he's still around, but some say he's a ghost. Go to sleep now, children." This is not just me being dramatic either. When researching for this video, I found so many people leaving comments like, "Oh my god, I thought he died until I read the books," and "I was 8 when I saw this, I cried my eyes out." As an adaptation, it does rank higher than the cartoon, but the cartoon had a lot more space to fill and a certain age range to cater to. I'm not entirely sure who this movie was aimed at, and that's part of the problem. It was a little too mature for children, but a little dull for adults. Perhaps this was just a product of its time and they did the best with what effects they could use, but I'm not sure I believe that. Movies like Shawshank Redemption and Groundhog Day were released just a year later and look far better. I know a low budget can be hard to handle, but it's not impossible. Was it really that difficult to find a white male horse, or just a white horse in general? I mean, I honestly don't know. If anyone out there does have some inside information on this, I would be so interested in hearing from you. Overall, I think the rating is fairly accurate. I don't remember hating this movie when I first saw it, but I also knew that Thara wasn't meant to die at the end. I can imagine that could be pretty rough for a small child who wasn't expecting it. Anyway, I want to thank you for tuning into this horrifically long-winded rant on a very niche topic. Thank you for sticking around if you've stuck it out this long. Can you think of any other strange niche books or cartoons from your childhood? Please leave them in the comments. Until next time. Hey dude, I'm trying to record. Can you stop showing off for your girlfriend? It's really noisy. That's what I deal with.